firing missiles throughout the day, earlier warning residents in the southern Israeli city of Ashkelon to leave their homes. Israel's anti-missile system was used to intercept much of the incoming rocket fire. Joe Biden saying Hamas's attack is an act of sheer evil.
This attack has brought to the surface painful memories and the scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide of the Jewish people. So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
Well, the rocket attacks have been continuing all day, and in addition to that, Israeli soldiers have been clearing the Kfar Aza kibbutz, one of the hardest-hit areas of Hamas attacks in the south. Men, women and children are believed to have been killed at the kibbutz, and Israeli troops going in there this evening have had to retrieve the bodies. It was after Hamas had breached the border from Gaza. Well, the IDF have this evening confirmed their soldiers have also been responding to incoming fire from Syria with artillery and mortar shelling. They have returned fire. GBNews reporter Charlie Peters is in Tel Aviv for us, and he spoke to one survivor of the Karmir kibbutz, which is between Ashkelon in the south and Gaza. Here's what she had to say.
Did you see anything in the street when you drove through? Did you see
bodies? And yeah, mostly bodies. Some of them were burned, so we didn't recognize people. Some of them were terrorist bodies. Later on, I found out that I have a few of my friends in the party, in the rave that was raging at that morning. Some of them were kidnapped, some of them were raped and taken under hostage to the Gaza Strip. It was really horrible.
Kibbutz attack survivor Danielle Byton speaking there. Now, in other news today, and in fact this evening, all flights currently suspended in and out of Luton Airport after a fire broke out in one of its car parks. Emergency services are on the scene, and parked cars can be clearly seen completely engulfed in flames burning on the top floor of the Terminal 2 car park. People are being urged to stay away and not to travel to the airport until further notice. Luton Airport closed tonight. And lastly, the UK and Ireland have been confirmed as hosts for Euro 2028. The Prime Minister joined the England squad earlier on today to celebrate the moment. The joint bid was the only one remaining following Turkey's withdrawal to focus on a joint bid with Italy. They're going to go for Euros in 2032. 6 of the venues are in England, with 1 each from Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, Scotland and Wales. The bid is expected to generate around £2.6 billion, and it's seen as vital for UEFA's financial recovery post-COVID as well. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Headliners, the best paper preview show on TV. I am Simon Evans. Joining me tonight we have Josh Howie and Paul Cox. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Simon.
Excellent. We're 3 bespectacled gents.
Yes,
we're very, very serious.
Must mean we're very clever.
The news is not going to evade us this evening, is it? Your glasses both look a bit more serious than mine.
Yeah, they do. Look like the two runners.
Paladin a little bit later. So let's take a look at those front pages through our 6 lenses of scrutiny. The Daily Mail, well, it's grim, of course. This was a Holocaust, pure and simple. The Guardian, Israeli troops mass on Gaza border as Hamas attack death toll hits 1,000. The Telegraph, Hamas massacres babies and children. The Times, Hamas cut the throats of babies in massacre. The Metro, 40 babies murdered by Hamas. And the Daily Star, as always, managing to avoid the gloom. Get a shroom. Fungi will cure world's diseases. Those were your front pages. So let's start with the front of the Mail, Josh.
Yeah, one of the most surreal contrast stories I think I've ever seen. You have Holly Willoughby, who is leaving this morning, and then you have 40 children shot dead. This was a Holocaust, pure and simple. Normally, I can't stand people evoking the Holocaust because the only thing that should be evoked or compared to the Holocaust is the Holocaust. But these are dead Jews killed in the most inhumane way. Reports of decapitated babies. I mean, it's unbelievable to even say that aloud. Without wanting to sort of sound like, well, you don't know, but how fully verified is this now? Because it came out pretty raw, didn't it? Yeah, it's been verified. More and more papers are coming in. They've been taking, there are photos and stuff. This is the crazy thing is, Hamas is
bloody cots and so on.
Yeah, Hamas is. I've filmed a lot of its footage, just putting it out live. There's warnings going out. My kids go to a Jewish school, and there are warnings going around from the school saying, make sure your kids are not on social media because this is part of their tactics, is to terrify a generation. And this quote here, the Holocaust, pure and simple. This is from his 90-year-old grandmother was dragged into the living room and shot twice in the head. You have other Holocaust survivors who have been kidnapped and taken into Israel. I mean, it's so insane to say this stuff aloud. I've been sort of fighting it online and through the day, but to say it...
It's erupted. It feels as if it's erupted out of nowhere. And the odd thing is, it seems as if it's erupted out of nowhere in Israel's world as well, as if they had no anticipation of it.
People can't fathom this level of cruelty and evil in humanity. And I think I wrote a thing about it, but I think it's hard for people to process that. And I've seen people online trying to sort of deny it or do this whataboutery, and for me, I've just lost all my. At the moment, I'm going.
It has been extraordinary. I dare say you've seen it as well, Paul. Some of the moral equivalence that's been drawn. Some of the, I suppose, these people would see it as contextualisation, but it just seems extraordinarily sort of emotionally bankrupt as much as anything.
It's absolutely harrowing. I'm someone who's spent the majority of my life as a bystander on this issue. It's something I grew up with. It was on the television. I didn't grow up in an environment where I knew particularly any Jewish or Palestinian or Muslim people. And now I know you, Josh. And, it's a privilege, actually. And, I think you have to view this in isolation. Now, I've spoken to people on both sides of this, and particularly on the Hamas side, you're told you can't look at it in isolation, you've got to look at the history of it. But no, absolutely, you must look at this particular instance in isolation, the depravity and just how the savagery, how disgusting it was, has to be taken very, very seriously. Now, what do you do? Because I think ultimately we all want peace, but you can't let it go. No. So this is just perpetual motion.
I mean, it does seem to me that the most obvious or the most plausible explanation is that external actors, probably Iran, I mean, we know Iran are involved, external actors regard Gazan lives as grass. Well, they're quite happy to sacrifice
Hamas do. They've hidden, for years they've hidden their weapons and shot from schools and
almost. They will happily see that mown down, and because they know it will grow again even more virulent in the fertilizer that will and how you escape that cycle at this point you don't know, but it can't be by saying, well, on the one hand, it's on the front page of the Guardian as well, Paul.
It is. So there is a difference between the two stories on the front, and I think I'd like to ask Josh if he'd want to talk about this at this point, because he's going to educate me rather than...
Oh, it's not that I just wanted to... We were just commenting before about just the contrast of here. Yeah. Other newspapers are going with the... just the brutality and the madness, what's happened, the travesty, the tragedy, anyway. This is the Guardian has gone, Israeli troops mass on the Gaza border as Hamas attack death toll hits 1,000. So because of this kibbutz where they finally got into, there's about 100. By the way, this kibbutz was famously a peace-loving kibbutz, very pro-peace and initiatives and whatnot. And 100, that's 10% of their population dead. So 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people dead. But the point is, Guardian just can't help themselves. They cannot. They have to put Israel troops mass on Gaza border. They have to quantify everything before they can then just deal with the death of the Jews. And just like the BBC, they didn't release anything on the first day until Israel had strike back. They waited about 4 hours before they finally released something, which was Israel strikes in response to what and then you just look at the language of it, and it's just sort of the wave after wave of airstrikes hit the militant-controlled territory, not the terrorist-controlled territory, even though Hamas are a designated terrorist organisation. And then they sort of go on later, and there's this guy about going, oh yeah, I don't think they've got some expert, and this is their front page. I don't think that there's any basis in understanding how the attacking Gaza is going to bring back the captives or get rid of Hamas. Well, thank you, Guardian. I'm sure that Israel is going to really be listening to your strategy. It's disgusting.
Paul, the Labour conference is on the front page there as well.
Yeah, it is.
Let me do that one as well.
Why not, Josh? Why not? Will Hill wounded Britain, Starmer promises despairing Tory voters. And when he talks about despairing Tory voters, he means those Tory voters, essentially, that voted, that would have usually have voted for Labour, but moved to Tories in 2019, largely because of two factors. Jeremy Corbyn, they couldn't understand anything he was going on about, me included, and Brexit. And both of those things have gone away.
Yes.
He hesitates. I'd imagine at least one of them will come back quite strongly over the next few years. However, that's what's happening there. He's offering a promised land, a future of great new rebuilding.
Yes. Well, he certainly seems to have done a fairly plausible job at rooting out the Corbynite tendency, although some people will never forget that he was quite willing to see Corbyn become Prime Minister.
Well, of course.
But he was glittered as well. I think we have some footage of that, because it never hurts to see an incident of this kind. I am not at all sure that wasn't a deliberate stunt.
Really? Come on. No, you can see he's not happy.
On his
He's not happy. He's not. I mean, that is a truly horrible thing to happen to anybody. Glitter. Yeah. Well, he's going to be getting that out for weeks.
We know if he has young children, he may not have been braced for that at all.
No. But it's weird how he thought someone was coming to do something nice. It's interesting when someone just immediately comes at you from a weird angle, you kind of like assume...
He's not been milkshake nearly enough, has he?
No, I get it. He certainly didn't go to boarding school.
I mean, I wouldn't certainly wish this upon Keir Starmer at all, but what on earth was his security team doing? They turned up about 5 seconds after they should do, and about 4 seconds after, had it been much, much, much more serious, than they would have been needed.
Or at least been just stop oil, and that might have been the end of the conference if somebody glued themselves to Keir's forehead.
I thought it'd be Simon Brodkin. He would do one of his things.
He's got time to very quickly address the civil servants trying to delay COVID warnings on the front page as well. This is Dominic Cummings, the best Prime Minister we never had.
Yeah, exactly. Well, during, obviously, the COVID inquiry, more stuff's ever coming out, and basically they're saying that we didn't go into lockdown because they didn't want to basically work on the weekends. Yeah. The civil servants. So it also just sounds like we knew that everything was a bit bedlam-y and there's some...
we also knew, I think, that Cummings... I mean, I think the reason he wanted Brexit was because of his despair at the civil service and the general sort of foot-dragging sort of tendency within it. And, of course, it's got not much better, has it?
I don't think we learned anything new there, Simon. I think, we've got Ego Man versus the civil service and...
There's a cartoon I want to see. That is the front pages covered. Join us after the break. We'll be looking at forbidden flags, failed forecasts, and, one or two other stories that I couldn't make acronymical. So, see you in a couple of minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GBNews.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. So we kick off with the Telegraph in this section. I suppose at this stage we should be relieved that the SNP at least remain neutral on this issue, Josh.
Oh, my God. OK, so let me read the headline first. Scottish Parliament will not fly Israeli flag in decision involving SNP who defended Hamas. It seems like we're going to be doing, like, oh, here's another thing about Israel. This isn't actually really about Israel. Of course, it is in the periphery of it. This is about people who I feel are a danger to Western values. This is the Green SNP, who they basically, all around the world, people have, whatever the politics of this thing has been, have shown Israel's flag or projected the image onto their buildings as a form of solidarity. Paris and all these other places. Yet Scotland is the one place in the world that's not done that. Just forget what you think of the history and all that stuff. Just to go, this is terrible. We, this tiny country, which would be the equivalent of like, someone worked it out, like 20,000 people dying here or whatever, like that 1,000 just because of the population difference. It's like, you were just the humanity of it.
Yeah.
You know, and this MP, Green SNP, Maggie Chapman, was on the panel that decided, no, we're not going to do that. And she put out a tweet on the weekend that was so insane as the first...
It's up on the screen.
Oh, here it goes out, yeah. What happens in Palestine is settler colonial... It's not settler colonial, this is where Jews come from. That's fine. It's actually reclaiming the land. It's an indigenous project to return the only country that's ever had. Military occupation, land theft and ethnic cleansing, which is ridiculous, where 1 million Jews have been kicked out of Arab countries and whatever. And... those are the things that... Yeah. So but what she said is it's apartheid, where, of course, Israeli Arabs have absolutely full equal rights. Illegal occupation. Gaza, Israel has not been in Gaza since 2005. So all this mental stuff. And this is as these unbelievable crimes against humanity were being revealed. So the fact that this person is so on the panel that says, no, we're not going to show an Israeli flag. But you know what? It wasn't just her. There was a Tory, there was a Labour person, there was the SNP as well.
I think they were all pro it, weren't they?
Well, no, but she can't... But if it's why would her one thing trump all the others?
I can only assume it has to be unanimous.
OK, well, if that's what... It doesn't say it here.
No, it doesn't. But Simon can prove me wrong.
all I saw was that Donald Cameron, it says the Scottish Tories External Affairs spokesman, said it's not surprising the Parliament's corporate body rejected the reasonable proposal of my colleague, given that Maggie Chapman herself sits on that very body. It seems that she is the problem. But there is a slight sense, isn't there, that the SNP do have an instinctive sort of sense of solidarity with Palestine, which obviously is not to say that Hamas is Palestine. And so on,
but this is the Green. This is the Green. You know, who are absolute cranks.
Worrying. Telegraph. No, sorry, I've slipped past one. I think. The next story is Paul Sella. She has opinions about flag flying.
So this is flying the Palestinian. So this is in the iNews. This is...
more of it! Come on!
Unbelievable, Josh. It's unbelievable. We'll get there, don't worry. Flying the Palestinian flag in Jewish areas could be a criminal offence, Sella Braverman tells police chief. So she's saying she has written to all chief constables in England and Wales, asking them to consider chants such as from the river to the sea. I hate having to read that out. Palestine will be free, and waving Palestine flags in Jewish areas as criminal offences. So if you just read the headline on this and don't go any further, my first instinct was like, oh, OK, this is a free speech issue. Perhaps we shouldn't be too hard on this. I know there's a lot of emotion around at the moment, but the more you read about it, the more you realise that there's some provocation going on here, some deliberate acts of people going into quite well-known Jewish areas and trying to provocate a reaction totally unnecessarily in a time when emotions are raising. I mean, this is...
I suppose the question is whether she's on solid ground, legally speaking. Obviously, we can probably all agree that morally it's reprehensible and it's totally unnecessary, and it would be very nice to see the police disperse these kind of activities a lot more efficiently. But can it ever be illegal to wave a flag? I don't know. I mean, they were waving the flag of the jihad of ISIS not long ago. That didn't seem.
I don't want to demean or undermine any of this in any way. But if you looked at football hooliganism and you looked at other fans in other areas, you'd want that to be dispersed. You don't necessarily need to take legal action.
I do agree with you, Paul. Now the Telegraph, Josh, and we are able to escape that grim story at last. The film industry instead should get realistic and hire a black female Bond.
Yeah, and then send her to kill all of Hamas. Black female James Bond would boost MI6 diversity. And this is Spy Chief. This is someone who's worked for 30 years in recruitment. John Taylor speaking at a literature festival, Cheltenham Literature Festival, has basically said, this is a good idea. Like, there are, of course, people seeing themselves or representations of themselves in those roles is more likely to lead to an uptick. And you can absolutely argue that having a diverse spy service to be able to go into different parts of the world makes total sense. That, you know...
I can totally see it if you regard Bond as a recruitment tool, first and foremost. I suppose that's the question, Paul.
Well, it's a fiction, for a start, so it can be anything. It could be a rabbit, for all I care.
Well, they've killed Bond himself, so whatever comes back as James Bond in the next one won't actually be James Bond.
No, it's probably going to lose 75% of its purest followers, isn't it, as a result? You know what, I don't want to be that guy, but at the end of the day, if this was matter of fact, then I don't think our prioritisation of requirements should be diversity in this matter. It should just be skill set. But
I did see one interesting thing he said in the same speech. Apparently, he said that he particularly disliked the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy stuff, John le Carré. He said that was less realistic than Bond.
He really sort of lays into him properly,
I mean, I did always think that was miserably declinist, as I think is the word, isn't it?
Declinist.
Anticipated the decline of Britain.
Oh, OK.
It was written during the Cold War, and then, of course, we won that, and le Carré never really apologised.
But Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the remake, that's like top 5 film for me.
I tell you what, it would be lovely, though, to see a black female Bond, and it would be lovely to see her bring the Middle East to a peaceful settlement, Josh, which is, I'm sure, what you're
killing all of Hamas, yes, exactly.
You can probably read my face. So, no, you don't mean that, Josh, and we do need to say that.
Just Hamas.
Wish to say that.
No,
Josh, Metro now. Will Young is desperate to be accorded refugee status from Britain.
This is great. I'm terrified to be a gay man in Tory Britain. I will leave if they win the election. So this is off the back, no pun intended, of Suella Braverman's speech, where she was criticised for basically saying, and actually reading the full context here, it's a bit fairer. She was basically saying there are places in the world where to be gay but there are it can be a death sentence. Or she said persecuted or whatever. But is that going to be enough to let people in? Like the low, is that enough of a standard? And obviously there are some people who do lie about it and like say that they're gay to gain asylum status and whatever. Anyway, the point is, that's different from the reality of being, I believe, of just, look, I can't speak to the...
being gay in Britain.
Being gay in Britain, I don't care. You don't notice it.
I've got to be honest. I found it very annoying. Not that I really care, but it's very annoying of him to claim some sort of victim status. The whole point of people coming to Britain and claiming that they're gay is because gays are treated well in this country and they're not treated well in Iran or wherever it is they might be coming from. To then turn that around and say, I, as a gay man, now feel threatened and I'm afraid, and if it's insulting to people who are actually battling against genuine institutional homophobia, to want to leave their country. The issue as to whether or not people can fake being gay in order to get into the country, well, I think I've read enough accounts from gay men on Twitter who say, yes, this does happen, and they're well aware of it, it's a difficult one to test, obviously, because it's much easier to see somebody's ethnicity than it is to see their sexual orientation.
Of course. I mean, I don't think Will Young did anything particularly clever here, but the cleverest thing that he did do was say that this was how he was feeling, which makes it impossible for us to challenge the honesty of it, because how do we know what he's feeling? What I would say is, not just anecdotally, but probably empirically, the evidence would suggest that Great Britain is a perfectly safe place to be for any sexuality, and homophobia, seems to really have become a thing of the past in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly with the trans debate. So I would argue that he's just saying things for a reaction here.
Yeah, I think so. Rather tiresome. I hope there's a new album. Mail now, Paul, and the latest attempt to tell the economic time by watching the second hand has come unstuck.
Yeah, this is a really interesting story here. So, Labour plans to reform cohabiting law. Is this the cohabiting law one? Yeah, smashing. Sorry, guys. Labour.
Sorry, no, this is the IMF.
OK, I did wonder. Sorry, that's why I checked in. So the IMF, again in the Mail, IMF mocked for succession of failed forecasts in its downgrades as it downgrades UK's growth for next year to lowest in G7. And of course, this is in the back of it getting it wrong many times now. In fact, the IMF has only been right twice since 2016. And just to give you some idea, the IMF is essentially one great big bank. It holds about £700 billion from its members, and each member gets a quota, UK getting about £10.5 billion. We put it in, and then it gets shared out. And I don't know what we get for that £10.5 billion, because it seems to be a very political approach to me.
Well, I know the IMF, like in worldwide terms, that and the World Bank are the two main bodies that people who don't like the sort of neoliberal, the spread, regard as the main agencies through which the American military are sent in to make it safe for capitalism, and then the IMF will come in and say, well, if you want us to get you out of this, morass that you've got yourselves into, then these are the rules you have to obey. That's essentially.
And I would say, again, we are much like with the Israel thing at the moment, we have to look at these things in isolation. We have to look at the particular story at the particular time. Yeah. And right now they're saying UK this, UK that, but it's France and Germany that are suffering the most economically.
And also, you're right to say you can only look at it in a particular moment, but if you talk about growth, Canada, they say, might have the greatest growth next year. Well, that's probably because, I don't know all the figures, but I bet that's because there's some dry tinder in Canada, because they probably had a rubbish couple of years. These things usually even out over the course of, I'm not, pretending that Britain has had a hayride for the last few years.
No, but the ONS did revisit this just a couple of months ago and say, actually, the future's a lot brighter for us than expected.
Excellent. We're at the halfway point. After the interval, Labour's war on men, Work's war on women, and the technology war on motorists. It's all war. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. So let's start with Labour conference news in the Mail now, Paul, and every day we edge a little closer to the world that Mugtail want.
Yes, this is all about cohabiting. So this is Labour plans reform of cohabiting law to give women more rights when couples split, as Emily Thornberry, lovely Emily, says they should not be forced to marry or stay in unhappy relationships to avoid ending up on the streets. I think the streets is a step too far. However, it is evocative.
This was in Liverpool, so
yes,
well, the home crowd.
I mean, essentially what they're talking about here is reforming the law. Reforming a law that doesn't actually exist, which is this common law partner, wife, husband, whatever it might be, that we've all kind of at some point in our lives assumed exists. I.e., you live with a girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever for some period of time in that house, and therefore you believe there's a 50-50 split at some point.
Yeah.
But sadly, when somebody passes away, the reality is that it's not quite that way.
Or, of course, if, as you say, or as they seem to be saying, say a couple live together, cohabit for 10 years and share the rent or whatever, but then they split up. How do you decide who gets to stay there? That is the point, I think, in this case.
Yeah, and do you know what? In practice, I don't have any particular issue with this at all. I think we've reached a point in society now, and within sort of Western society in particular, where marriage... I'm married. I think you are too, so I know Josh is.
I think I am.
Yeah, you think you are too.
Yeah.
I've been married for 20 years. It's something that... But it's not something that's the norm anymore. It's not totally the norm. No. So we need to accommodate for this type of relationship, I think.
There is a sort of understanding. I think it used to be understood in equity that you pay a certain amount if you...
Yeah.
You know, if
if you can prove...
Yeah.
But I think that what they're saying here is particularly people with young children, but also the other thing, they give no time of day. Like, how long are we talking about? 2 years? 3 years? They're talking about, like, say you've been together with someone for 3 years. Yeah. It's not necessarily about who owns the house. It's like, should you pay your partner something? What I would suggest is we do get married and then you get a prenup. Yeah. And then you don't have to deal with any of this.
It's funnily enough, I think there is a lot to be said for that, to be honest, you know, genuinely.
You're welcome, guys.
I read an Alan de Botton book recently. He said the great thing to approach a marriage is the least romantic commitment you'll make in your life. There's a lot to be said for that. Independent now, shocking evidence that women execs are struggling with stress. Evidence that should probably see me put on the suicide watch. This is what stress amounts to.
Well, there's it. Far more women executives experience stress than men with addiction problems common. Whoa, I don't know how that works. Anyway, point is 4 in 10 women in high-paid jobs say they take recreational drugs once a week. 3 in 10 say they consume a lot of drugs during work. That's pretty amazing. So they're obviously the people to party with. And these are women, senior business leaders who take home $75,000. So what you're saying is there are these women out there, they're partying, they're taking drugs, they earn loads of money. Where are they?
Why are they complaining?
What?
What I love is they're coming out, a third of women say they've struggled with alcohol. I mean, what does that mean, struggling with alcohol? They've drunk alcohol.
Unless you can't get...
They struggle to lift it up to their lips. It's too heavy for my little...
Are properly chilled?
Irrespective of the sex involved... in terms of gender. No, there's no sex involved, according to this. I mean, disappointingly.
Old-fashioned.
No, they said no. There is a bit I read to the end, and it said that they work out. They work out their stress by having sex.
Oh, this is ridiculous.
54% of female execs reported using sex to relieve stress.
Who with?
32% of men. Well, I don't know, but I want to watch this video.
It is a depressing insight, though, isn't it? I mean, the idea. But what I mean by that is the whole rat race idea, where these people in such hellish jobs, they can't possibly get through the day.
Well, there will be a lot of people watching this who will probably be thinking quietly to themselves, I knew women wouldn't... They thought they wanted to go to... And they don't like it. They don't like it at all. They would much rather be at home. But there it is.
Yeah, well, indeed, and that's a very...
They're taking too many drugs and having too much sex and earning too much money.
If you were a woman now who wanted to stay at home, let's say you were such a bizarre, archaic throwback of an individual who just wanted to stay at home and raise her kids, you'd have no one either side of you, would you? Be no one in the street. Do you know what I mean? It's a hollow shell every morning.
It would be. That's a really interesting
There are
point.
still plenty of women. And also now women... People working from home, there was loads of people in our neighbourhood. It was all great.
That is true. Telegraph now, finally some good news, albeit in the form of a lottery, Paul.
Well, nearly half of speed cameras in England and Wales are out of action. Let me tell you something. The one on Putney Hill definitely isn't.
No.
Because I got caught doing 24 and a 20 just recently on my way to GB News.
I got a big fine for parking outside the fire engines on that hill as well.
Did you?
Yeah.
Something to do with Putney Hill. I don't know what it is. It's the borough of Wandsworth. They don't like us here at GB News. Well, you might do. I don't know.
I say parking. Stopped briefly in a traffic light queue. I didn't park.
No, just abandon your car. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I mean, they're saying here that Derbyshire, Essex and Devon and Cornwall are the regions across England with the most speed cameras, with more than 100 each. However, in all three forces, had at least 40% incapable of catching speeding drivers.
Wait. Sorry. Are you telling me that it was totally, like, me cutting those cameras down, mate, it was worthless?
Yeah.
What a waste of time. Are we going to get the police coming now?
What this article doesn't give us...
I'm amazed with the cutting down thing, they do like the chainsaw or the actual grinders or whatever. Why don't they just spray red paint on the lens? I haven't been able to understand that. Would have been the obvious thing to do, wouldn't it be?
If we admitted to knowing why or when...
I don't want the police coming around. I've seen those videos.
It's quite widely known that the old Gatso cameras, which are the wider, bigger ones, the old wet film type cameras, just haven't worked for years because they can't replace the parts.
No, that's lovely. The old wet film, though. I like that scene, like in the Open or something.
But people want to know. I've got one. This is what people want to know. They want to know
where.
Don't go to Wales or Suffolk because that's where they work loads. And do speed in Leicestershire. There you go.
Mail now, Josh. Interesting findings concerning the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, Britain bucks global happiness index trend, with poll revealing non-religious people in the UK have a higher sense of well-being than the faithful. So there's a lot of statistics that they're thrown around here, but the gist of it is that if it's a religious country, like not 80% of people are religious, then actually religious people are happier.
Right.
And I'm wondering, because if it sounds like it's a fundamentalist country, you just have to say that. But if it's not not a particularly religious country, then actually, like, atheists are more happy.
It just feels like it's very much like stay-at-home mums. It's as long as you've got a critical mass, it's fine. You just don't want to be the only one who's not going to church.
Yeah, the more I read of this, it was less about religion. You know, it was less a reflection on less religion and more about the fact that there is less religion everywhere, and therefore there's no reflection on happiness.
What I think is quite interesting is that, I mean, it happened a few years ago, the positive psychology movement, and every so often it has a little sort of new wave, but people are starting to understand what it might be that you can take from religion without having to believe in a supernatural element, like the regular expression of gratitude, the regular, you know, meditation practice or whatever. There's all sorts of ways, without kind of like wanting to make it too kind of cherry picking, where you can benefit from some. I read a book recently, a guy called Rupert Sheldrake, who talks all about going. Yeah, it's very interesting. Talks all about going on pilgrimages, even if it's not to an actual faith that you believe in. You know,
and rituals.
Yeah. These can be very, you know, they can furnish a life quite.
Telepathy's his thing.
Yes, he has some very extraordinary views about dogs, but you know, I like to take a man on his spectrum. Mail again, Paul. This story will certainly resonate within the comedy community, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Psychotherapist Philippa Perry, which happens to be Grayson Perry's wife, warns that ADHD is becoming a fashionable mental health buzzword amid a rise in diagnosis, and says it's driven by social contagion. Now, she's being vilified for this. However, what I always find very interesting, whether it's ADHD or anything, and I'll come back to ADHD in a moment, it's always the people that call out the emperor not wearing the clothes that seem to get in trouble. What the statement that she's making is true. We are seeing a massive increase in people with ADHD, a lot of them self-diagnosed, and it can be quite unhelpful, and they're wearing it as a badge. And the reason it could be quite unhelpful is, I mean, we probably all know, I know I certainly do, dear friends of mine that have got ADHD that really struggle with life as a result. And they're trying to chucked in with all these other people now who want to do Edinburgh shows.
It was a similar thing when people started talking about OCD a few years ago. I'm terribly OCD. What they mean is they like to see all their cups in a row. You know, I know people who can't leave the house on occasion because they, you know, can't stop watching. It's a horrible, debilitating condition.
20 times more people have been diagnosed with conditions in the last 5 years. So of course it's social
racket.
But it's my wife says she's going on about it. Sorry, don't get angry with me.
Good old Grayson. I've got an interesting story about him, but that's for the break. One more section to go. After the break, we have hip-hop shortages, solar storm hit Swans, and it's all in a world of digital simulation. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. So we start the final part with the Daily Mail. One of my favourite gee-whizzery speculations has a new iteration.
Indeed. Are we living in a simulation? A physicist claims he has new evidence we're simply characters in an advanced virtual world. This is, of course, essentially the plot of The Matrix. Basically, because I can't explain this in any way. I really tried. I read.
Do you want me to have a go at it?
Yeah, I think as I was reading this earlier, and again now, I'm thinking Simon's going to fill his.
Can I just say one thing? It does say, to put it simply, everything appears to evolve in an equilibrium state where the information content is minimal. That's not simply. So go, please.
Roughly speaking, he says that you can think of all the matter in the world, all the atoms that contain within the Earth, at least in terms of information, in terms of bits, and how many bits of information actually in the world of computing we've created in the time that computing has been around since the mid-70s. And when you see the acceleration and the amount of information we're creating all the time and how much more complicated it's getting, it won't be very much longer before we could create reality such as we see it. And
Which goes against
you wouldn't be in it.
Second law of thermodynamics, which means which something that's broken couldn't be put back together.
Yes.
Which is essentially what that would be doing. So all these things that have been taken apart could be put back together.
Oh, so I still don't get it. Great.
It does feel a bit to me like...
The only thing I would say is it doesn't feel to me like it's a particularly new insight. It's just a slightly different way of expressing it. But it's the same basic idea that has led to people thinking there's a simulation hypothesis is that if it were possible that a simulation could be created at some point in the future, then the odds that that's what we're living in become almost like a trillion to one that we are, because there would be so many simulations that we're much more likely to be living in one of those than in the other.
I have definitive proof that we're not living in a simulation.
Go ahead.
Because your explanation was so painful for me that there's no way that the
there
Matrix
are more
would do that to
painful
me.
things in life than myself. This is like the old I refute it, thus kicking the stone. Anyway, I find it intriguing. There are, if people are interested, there's a great film on YouTube about it called The Simulation Hypothesis. About an hour long, and it makes some very plausible explanations, not least quantum entanglement, which becomes solved immediately.
Oh, I know about that.
Is it just me, or does it feel like science is looking for God when they do these things? It does a little bit. To me, it feels like, there isn't a God to them, so they're just trying to find something that would replace God.
That's a play, isn't it?
Mate, yes,
All questions are at bottom theological questions. What about the Telegraph? Bad news for craft beer drinkers. Hip-hop crops hit.
Drink up now. A global beer shortage could be on the way. So this is a beer shortage on the basis really of global... This is a global warming story with the growth of hops crowbarred in. It feels a little bit like to me. Because there seems to be zero evidence to suggest that this would happen, because they've used a model or a simulation, whatever words you want, terminology you want to use to describe how they've come up with this. So what we don't understand as a result of this story is what the baseline data was. If you don't know what's being put in and what it's being compared against, it's very difficult to ascertain whether the output is of any value. However, let's assume for a minute that global warming is going in the direction that these people believe it is. They are saying that hops, particularly in southern parts of the UK, will struggle to grow in the same way they used to. And it'll be mainly in the north, so we'll be drinking less beer as a result. I think we'll just be drinking different tasting beer.
Exactly. The whole thing about hops is that most people don't even like it. Apparently, it was introduced into beer to make people slow down a bit initially, I think.
Right,
it's not a very pleasant taste. I mean, it takes 16-year-olds quite a few glasses of a decent bitter to adapt to it. I mean, I like it now, obviously.
But if there was truth to this, if a global beer shortage actually being on the way, we would get to net zero in about a month.
You got real, boy.
Such a good point.
The Metro have bad news for travellers, though at least they're only swans, and at least this time it's not you, Les, it's solar storms.
Yeah, solar storms are pummelling Earth and screwing with swans. They had to say that in the Metro?
I know, screwing with.
Messing with, I don't know, come on,
Queen
Metro.
wouldn't be happy.
So it's interesting. So it's basically because of the solar storms, the effect it has on the planet's magnetic field, they've sort of gathered all the data and they've shown that basically birds won't fly or go on migrations when there are these big solar storms, because obviously it's messing with the magnetic field, which is how they travel. Which is fascinating. Not just birds, also sea turtles.
I didn't know that. I remember reading, I think they have it in their beaks, like there's a bit of iron in their beaks. I don't know if this is all birds. Swans look as if their beaks wouldn't contain iron, don't they, somehow? I don't know.
They do, yeah, I've often thought that, Simon.
But
as with every one of these stories, we read the news cycle a lot, the three of us, and you do get to see this. There's always a paragraph that undermines the whole story.
Go on.
And here it's the one that says, however, little is still known about how these disturbances affect animals, which depend on the Earth's magnetic field or migratory navigation and orientation. So they're sort of saying, look, if it did affect them, this would affect them, but we don't know how much it affects them.
What they're saying is...
It does affect them, but we don't know how it affects them.
We don't know the mechanism, but we do observe that when the solar storms flare up, the swans stay at home.
They don't bother. They're like, don't bother.
I'm not going out in this.
And the turtle's just
going to break an arm.
My sat-nav is spinning. Break a child's arm.
Break a child.
You've got to make sure you're not libelling swans.
Oh, yeah, sorry, as well. Mass and swans. I've really got it in for everybody tonight.
You're going to hem yourself in. Some genetic meddling news now in the Mail. I'm sure everyone is very relaxed about this approach to bird flu.
Unlikely. I mean, they're wrapping this up as a good news story, I think. But gene editing techniques could stop the spread of bird flu among chickens and reduce the risk of it making the jump to humans, a new study finds. So the more you read about this story, the more it makes you feel like this is a big advert for genetically modified food, which, you know, is going to upset a lot of people. At the end of the day, I don't care how the chicken was produced. As long as it's covered in those 11 secret herbs and spices, I am very comfortable. But there are a lot of people out there, because genetically modified food is much larger in places like the United States than it is in the UK and Europe. And, you know, whenever we've talked about trading deals with the United States, we've talked about food, people have gone, but they fill all their chickens with water.
And chlorine.
But you won't get bird flu.
I've got to say, I think there are some... I mean, obviously, with crops, we know that they use genetic modification to make them resistant to bugs and diseases and so on, and they also use it to make them resistant to the things they then spray the bugs with, so that they kill them. But, you know, it's always moving in a direction towards minimising the amount of disease, right? That's the main thing. It would be also quite good, would it not, to, like, genetically modify chickens so that they couldn't be aware of the horrors of the conditions they live in?
Make them with even smaller brains.
Really, utterly brainless.
Well, maybe. I mean,
kill themselves.
But that could well be like lab-grown meat or whatnot. But bird flu is a real issue. It obviously has a massive impact on the economy or aviation economy or whatever. And but they've talked here about a lot of tests and 9 out of 10 this and whatever, and they didn't do the chicken nugget test at the end.
Right.
Like, they should do, like, just like, we're messing with the genes here.
Yeah.
Afterwards, after all your tests, cook them up. Do they taste like chicken nuggets?
I mean, you two both seem to consume your chicken in very fast food form. I'm much more of a roast man myself.
I prefer it in a roast, to be honest. I've just got the body of a man who doesn't.
Finally, Josh, last story for tonight. Back to the Metro, a quick game of Russian roulette with the future of the entire species.
Yeah, humans have a 1 in 6 chance of going extinct this century. Apparently, this is from an Oxford-based philosopher, Toby Orb. He's got a book called The Precipice. And then there was a lot of stuff about... So, look, what they're saying it could be is climate change, nuclear weapons, bioengineered pathogens, rogue AI and large asteroids. But the gist of it was this article, and I know you're much cleverer than me, so you know this, you actually understood this, but it seemed to be it's all about probability, and if stuff had happened before, like a large asteroid, that would seem to make it a lot less chance it would happen again. And in the end of it, it comes all down to they think, well, 1 to 6 kind of sounds nice.
The thing about it, which he said, which I thought was quite interesting, is that it's not something you can talk about in terms of probability. Because probability is, if you say, for instance, there's a 1 in 6 chance it will rain tomorrow, and you say that every so often, then you can easily monitor how often it rained the next day, and you can say whether that forecast was accurate. This is a forecast about a thing that will be such a one-off event from which there will be no return, there'll be no opportunity to go, well, you said that last year, didn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's just saying, it's meaningless,
right
essentially.
once.
But he is identifying certain things, and it was interesting how he said climate change, nuclear weapons and bioengineered pathogens he regards as a big risk. Rogue AI and large asteroids, he doesn't. Now, I think he's Don't you think that rogue AI ought to be in the first category then?
I think he's just saying that because other scientists have said quite opposite. By the way, just for the people listening on the radio, when Josh said, "I know you're much cleverer than I," he was referring to Simon, not me. But it does feel like anyone could write a book like this at the moment because I mean, one of the sub-headlines is, can we learn from the moon? And I don't know if the moon has consciousness, Simon, so I don't know if we can learn from it. But
well, you could, I suppose, project a few texts onto it and get kids to read it that way.
But it is made of cheese, isn't it?
It is, I'm sure. That's one of the risks we face. The show is nearly over. Let's take another quick look at Wednesday's front pages. The Daily Mail. This was a Holocaust, pure and simple. And bye-bye Holly Willoughby. Guardian, Israeli troops mass on Gaza border as Hamas attack, death toll hits 1,000. And Keir Starmer. The Telegraph, Hamas massacres babies and children. And the man glittering Keir Starmer. Metro, 40 babies murdered by Hamas. The Daily Star, get a shroom. Fungi will cure world's diseases. Well, those were your front pages. That's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Josh and Paul. Paul is back tomorrow at 11 p.m. with Leo Kearse and Lewis Schaefer. If you are watching at 5 a.m, stay tuned for breakfast. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for entrusting your evening to us. See you soon. Good night.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Tonight on Farage, we talk about the utterly disgraceful scenes on the streets of London last night. And we ask, should our police be doing more? We go to Tel Aviv with Charlie Peters from GB News to get the latest on what's been happening in Israel and Gaza today. And demoted down the running order today of the news agenda, of course, is Keir Starmer's big speech to the Labour Party conference, where he was covered by a protester in glitter. What that says about Labour Party's security, I just don't know. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight, the Hamas terror group has launched renewed rocket attacks on Israel throughout the day today, targeting the city of Ashkelon in the south. The missiles were fired after the terrorist group warned residents to leave the city by 5 o'clock local time. Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile system protecting most residents and being able to intercept many of the rockets. Air raid sirens were heard elsewhere across Israel. Its defence forces claiming more than 4,500 rockets have been launched by Hamas since Saturday. The Israeli embassy to the United States says more than 1,000 of its citizens have been killed in the violence so far. And those latest attacks come in response to an unprecedented barrage of Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, forcing nearly 200,000 people to flee their homes. Israel is continuing to bomb the enclave. These pictures from the port city of Gaza on the coastline from earlier on this afternoon. Port buildings and vehicles on fire, black smoke pluming from the centre of the fire. We know apartment blocks, schools and a United Nations building among those hit by hundreds of attacks. And the UN has warned Israel its siege of Gaza is illegal under international law, adding that the abduction of hostages by Hamas is also forbidden. Well, here the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the UK will continue to support British-Israeli families.
We stand in solidarity with Israel and the people of Israel in the face of these barbaric acts of terrorism. And last night I went to visit a synagogue in London to express my support for the Jewish community in the UK. I was unequivocal with them that we will make sure that they feel safe at this time, and the police have been given very clear guidance and advice from the government to do everything that they can to keep the community safe. They will clamp down on any behaviour that falls foul of the law. I just remind everyone that Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation.
Well, in other news today, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has promised a decade of national renewal if his party is elected at the next general election. He was addressing the Labour Party conference in Liverpool today, and he was pledging to build a better Britain. He announced plans to create new towns and build more homes. He also focused on the UK's economic growth as he laid out Labour's plans for Britain's future. Entertainment news, and the TV presenter Holly Willoughby has announced she's quitting ITV's This Morning show after 14 years on the programme. In an Instagram post today, she said it had been an honour just to be part of its story, and she had made the decision for herself and her family. Last week, a shopping centre security guard was charged and remanded in custody over an alleged plot to kidnap and kill the star. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, perhaps it was predictable, but it was still, I have to say, very, very unpleasant indeed. I was in a car just after 11 o'clock last night, driving down a main road in London, and there were gathered in the middle of the road a Palestinian protest. I have to say, we turned the car around and went away. And actually, in Kensington High Street and elsewhere, we witnessed, I thought, some pretty shocking scenes. But the media are getting this all wrong. The media are calling these Palestinian protests, and they went on in Brighton, in Manchester, in Newcastle, in London and other places around the country. These were not Palestinian protests. They were Palestinian celebrations. They were out in the streets celebrating acts of kidnap, rape and murder committed by Hamas. That is actually what was going on our streets yesterday. Just have a look at these scenes from Kensington High Street, right outside the Israeli embassy. These pictures were from earlier in the evening. I can assure you as the evening went on, there were bottles flying and things got a little bit more heated. But be in no doubt, this was a celebration. And some of the language and some of the behaviour was highly open to question. Just look at this balaclavaed man being interviewed in the street last night and listen very carefully to what he says and watch the right index finger gesture.
Is it a big night for you guys?
You know, brother, this is the end of the occupation against Palestinian people. Israel is a terrorist state.
How do you feel about what happened in Israel yesterday? About the killings? How do you feel about the killings and the murders? Nothing?
So there we are. Israel is a terrorist state. When he was asked about the murder of innocent civilians, he had absolutely nothing to say. And what of that gesture? Well, many would say it's an old Islamic symbol to say there is just one God. However, it has been, as you can see in this picture, appropriated very regularly by ISIS over the course of the last few years. I'm not suggesting this gentleman was ISIS, but I am saying it was, at the very least, deeply provocative, which leads me in to the Home Secretary, Sella Braverman, who today has written to chief constables, copying in police and crime commissioners across the country. And she says there should be a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism, and the police should look at chants such as, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which, of course, implies the obliteration of Israel as a state. Rishi Sunak himself, the Prime Minister, said today anyone in the UK found to be supporting Hamas in the wake of the attack on Israel should be held to account. And, of course, the same goes for ISIS. Now, what we had on the streets of London last night were all sorts of the vilest, most racist and basest things, frankly, you could ever hear. And yet there were very, very few arrests. And I'm asking a question, should the police do more? You see, if any of you stood outside a mosque tonight in central London and shouted out foul abuse about the Muslim religion, I think within about half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, you would have your collar felt by the old bill. Should the police be doing more in this situation? Please give me your thoughts. Farage@gbnews.com. Now, I'm joined by Jonathan Sacerdoti of the Jewish Chronicle and the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. Jonathan, your reaction to what we saw on the streets last night?
I don't actually work for the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, though I did found it.
You founded it? Right, OK. We'll give you credit for that.
Yeah. I mean, Nigel, it's a really horrible and difficult time for Jewish people here in the UK and around the world, especially in Israel. And I think that watching what's going on in Israel, watching effectively pogroms carried out by the Palestinian terrorists from Hamas who infiltrated the country has been heartbreaking enough. But then for Jews in the United Kingdom and elsewhere around the world, we saw also in Sydney yesterday a protest where they were calling for Jews to be gassed. I think seeing those things happen it's not just heartbreaking because it harks back to a very dark period of our recent history, but it's heartbreaking because we know that they mean it. What happened in Israel was the rape, murder, beheading of men, women, children, babies. Today we heard reports that now that the Israeli army have cleared Kfar Aza, one of the kibbutzim near the border, they found 40 dead babies, some of them beheaded.
Has that been confirmed?
One of the reporters from the station that I work for in Israel had reported it on the channel. I haven't been there myself, but this is the report. You know, as with all these things, we need to take everything and try and make sure everything is accurate. But certainly, I've seen videos online. Most viewers won't have seen the videos that Hamas themselves put out because they're far too brutal and disgusting to show.
We actually can't show them here on GB News. There may come a point where we have to. if this escalates and continues?
I think we got used at one point, I say, to seeing ISIS beheading videos, for example. Those were on the news. This is really in the same vein. I've seen some really horrific things in the course of the last couple of days reporting on this as a journalist. People being killed with an axe, children made to watch their families being killed before they're killed, old women, some possibly no longer with it anymore, suffering from dementia or other illnesses, being taken hostage into Gaza, the lifeless body, possibly dead, of a woman who had presumably been raped from the appearance, being spat on in Gaza. This is truly horrific.
This is pure racial hatred, isn't it?
Well, as far as one can see, Hamas is motivated by hatred of Jews. Their own founding charter makes it very clear that they don't believe in any form of negotiations. They don't believe in any form of struggle for their own liberation other than jihad. And I brought a few quotes with me just so that I could tell you it's not just my opinion. It's their founding charter. Article 7, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews. When the Jew will hide behind stones and trees, the stones and trees will say, "Oh, Muslims, oh, Abdullah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." Article 8, Allah is its target, the Prophet is its model, the Quran, its constitution, jihad is its path, and death for the sake of Allah is the loftiest of its wishes. Article 13, Islamic resistance movement. Article 28, Israel, Judaism, Jews challenge Islam and the Muslim people. It's chapter and verse.
No. I mean, now look, they would say, there are some in Palestine would say that Israel overreacts. I'm
not sure what a suitable reaction is for a founding charter that
that's
wants
Hamas. That's Hamas. We can't. I mean, are you saying we can judge all Palestinians by Hamas? Surely you're not saying that.
Of course, I'm not. No. There is also, for example, Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, who are seen as the moderates. But last year, during a news conference with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin, he said that Israel had carried out 50 massacres, 50 Holocausts. The Chancellor himself of Germany was disgusted by that.
The pro-Palestinian wing see it. And there are many in this country who are sympathetic to, as they want a two-state solution, they're sympathetic to Palestine. And I understand that. That's a perfectly legitimate argument. What is not legitimate is to go on the streets and celebrate acts of bestiality, and that is what's going on. But, Jonathan, what does Israel do now? You see, I'm not normally a fan of William Hague, but I thought what he wrote today in the Times is very interesting and very much in line with the debate we had here last night, that Hamas are provoking Israel, expecting an extreme response, wanting to bust apart the Abraham Accords, the potential deal that was going on with Saudi Arabia. What does Israel do now?
I think at the moment Israel has really no choice about what to do because of what happened to its civilian population. It has to try to eliminate the risk of Hamas being able to do this in the future. It has to try to get back as many of those hostages. There's something like 100, possibly more, Israeli civilians currently presumed to be held hostage in Gaza. Some will be dead, some will be in a terrible condition, all of them without medications they might be on, elderly people, young people. There are nursing babies there without their mothers, without breast milk. They need to get those people back as best they can. And they just need to make sure this can't happen again. We've seen a cycle of wars with Gaza.
So the Israeli army go into Gaza and try and hunt these people down?
Well, I can't predict exactly what will happen, but that is everyone's best assumption. But of course, that means that Hamas won't just be this time using the Palestinian people as a human shield. They'll also be using Israeli people as a human shield because they have hostages from Israel who they've said they're keeping in tunnels. They're going to be putting them right where Israel might want to strike to get rid of terrorist infrastructure.
And we've got this in Gaza. I mean, what about the West Bank? One of the great cries from the Free Palestine campaign is that West Bank has been illegally occupied. How do you respond to that? And are we going to see problems there too?
I think all of us would like to see a world in which Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side. They can each have a fulfilment of their dream for self-determination, to live in peace. But I don't think what we've seen just now has really put us any closer to that. I think that Hamas has set back the cause of Palestinian statehood, nationhood by decades. But I must also say that none of this is new. It may be shocking for the moment, and that's because for the last 20-odd years, Israel's been quite successful at stopping these kinds of attacks. But I'm old enough to remember the 80s, the 90s, when Jews and Israelis were being blown up on buses, in restaurants, in cafes. Civilians were once again targeted for slaughter because of their Israeli/Jewish identity. And I think that there has been a period of maybe a couple of decades when that's been less frequent because of Israel's constant efforts to protect its
many
population.
Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli army too. I mean, the killings on both sides.
Well, the situation is horrible. I think that it's interesting because, you know, there's been a lot of criticism I've had online of calling them terrorists, saying, well, the Israeli army are the true terrorists, and how can you call one side terrorists and the other side not? And, of course, I think any right-thinking person who's upset by the death of civilians on one side is upset by the death of civilians on both sides. I don't want to see any innocent civilians, innocent people being killed. I will say this, the Israeli army doesn't go door to door in areas of pure civilian population, throwing grenades into people's homes, raping, pillaging, beheading babies, as far as we've heard. They don't go into music festivals of Palestinians, block all the exits so that when they try to drive out and escape, they can torch their cars. Some of the bodies, over 200 bodies in that music festival, are so badly charred that in order to get identities of the people, they've had to go... I spoke to a mother who had to have a DNA sample of hers taken to see if they could try and identify
we spoke to
children.
a survivor of that festival last night. Final thought, and this is not an easy one for the police, and I get that. Should they be doing more to stop some of the things that were being said on London streets last night?
Well, clearly the Home Secretary thinks so because of this letter. Other members of the Cabinet have spoken out too, and I think the Jewish community is very grateful for that because for years, many people in the Jewish community have felt that there hasn't been a tough enough response. We're used to these kind of protests, which can often be very scary and do make Jewish people feel very uncomfortable in their own cities. We're British citizens. We have every right to be protected like anyone else. I think that if the police take note of this letter and if the politicians are serious about encouraging them to do so, maybe this will be the beginning of enforcing the actual law, which is to say that support for Hamas is illegal.
Hamas, ISIS, any of those prescribed organisations. Jonathan Sachadoti, thank you for coming in and joining me. And it is very, very grim news that we get from Israel and from Gaza. But what happened on the streets of London last night, I thought was pretty unforgivable. In a moment, we go to Tel Aviv to join GB News' Charlie Peters to get the latest update on what's going on there. Back with you in a couple of minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We now go live to Tel Aviv, where GB News' Charlie Peters is in situ. Charlie, good evening. Please give us an up-to-date report of what has been happening in the region today.
There's fighting going on right now, Nigel. It's not clear if the militants fighting with the IDF outside of the Gaza Strip have recently crossed the border or if they have remained since the invasion on Saturday. But we have seen reports in the last 30 minutes that new sporadic small arms fire conflicts are occurring between defence forces on the Israeli side and Hamas terrorists. We've seen reports of some Hamas terrorists being killed in Sderot and also in Malfasim nearby. This morning, the Israeli government claimed that they had closed off the border with Gaza, that they had mined it and secured the fences. But then, less than 12 hours later, battles erupted nearby, often just 10 kilometres away from those border fences. So it's very clear that right now, as we speak, small arms fire at least is ongoing. And in the hours before that event, we have seen more rocket attacks going in across the country. In northern Israel, from southern Lebanon, we've seen artillery fire coming down, likely from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Israel deployed helicopter gunships and tank artillery to fire back. In the central region, in Tel Aviv and further down where I am, we have had the air siren on as rockets were destroyed overhead by the Iron Dome defence system. But people here, including us, had to take shelter as that fire came in. And then down to the south, as I said, those clashes occurring, but also more rocket attacks flying into Ashkelon and further south.
So effectively, Charlie, we now have Israel at war on 2 fronts. Clearly, the Gaza front bigger, but there must be real worries that perhaps Hezbollah will also get involved in this from the north.
That's right. I mean, there's been sporadic fighting on that northern front for the last 48 hours. We do know that several IDF soldiers have died up there, including members of Israel's Tier 1 Special Forces, who share a motto with the SAS, who dares wins. They have confirmed casualties in repelling members of almost certainly Hezbollah, but also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad as they launch assaults from the north. We don't know if they are operating in tandem with Hamas terrorists in Gaza, but they are certainly exploiting the chaos caused by the IDF having to pull so many resources into the south due to the devastating invasion on Saturday. It is a complex, widespread and multi-fronted war as it stands.
Yeah, no, it is. And do we have any rough, up-to-date idea on numbers killed and wounded on both sides?
Well, it's stretched now into the thousands on both sides for the first time late this afternoon. We do know that regular reports will come in from the IDF on the number of casualties from its own troops. Updates from the Palestinian side are less regular, but the Hamas-run health ministry is putting out information on those killed by Israeli airstrikes into Gaza, which has now tipped over the 1,000 figure. Over 1,500 Hamas militants and terrorists have been killed in Israel since the violence erupted. And that number is likely to rise as we see reports only coming in the last hour of more militants fighting with the IDF in and around the Gaza Strip.
Now, Charlie, the politics of this is very, very complicated. The Egyptians insisting that they did give intelligence information to the Israelis, which they ignored. Some saying that the Prime Minister Netanyahu was too busy with domestic political concerns to take notice, and no one knows the truth of that. But is there much public debate about what Netanyahu does next? You know, there's a lot of people out there, I mentioned William Hague earlier on, a lot of people saying, look, actually, Hamas are trying to get Israel to overreact. Is there much public debate about militarily what Israel should do next?
I think both sides seem extremely united, both the Palestinian cause and those in Israel. There is not much public debate internally in Israel. There is very much, indeed, even at the governmental level, a united government, calls for a cross-party governance, which Netanyahu has supported. He runs a very controversial government, of course, the religious Zionism part of his government in the Knesset, attracting all sorts of protests internally. But the protests against the perceived controversial intervention of the judiciary has been called off. That has been going on very regularly. That has now been called off during this conflict. And we've also seen people from across Israeli politics coming together really to back whatever this government does next as it looks to put into what is likely a ground assault into Gaza Strip, the first one since 2014.
Yeah, I have to say, I think whatever restraint is being urged by some on the international stage, I think it most unlikely that he will not go for a military assault of some kind, and probably, sadly, some large civilian casualties with it. Charlie Peters from Tel Aviv, thank you for your report. We'll speak to you again at the same time tomorrow. Now, with all of this going on, the horrific events in Israel and Gaza, the appalling scenes on London streets last night, today's news schedule has been very different to that would have been planned by Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. And actually, GB News, the other main broadcasters, suddenly the Labour conference is not the size of story that it was supposed to be. But in a moment, we'll come to Sir Keir Starmer's speech, his prospects of what he hopes will be a decade in power, and how on earth somebody related to the Just Stop Oil movement was able to get onto the platform, cover the Labour leader in glitter, and not be resisted for at least 15 seconds. The Labour conference in just a moment.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Before we go to Liverpool, at last count, 10 British citizens have been killed in the conflict in Israel. That was the last we had. That number may now be significantly higher. I just don't know. But one of those that's been killed is Nathaniel Young, a 20-year-old who was serving with the 13th Battalion of the Israeli Defence Forces. And right now, there is a vigil going on for him in North London at Cockfosters and North Southgate Synagogue. And GB News' Ray Addison is there to cover the vigil.
Good evening, Nigel. Yes, well, this is not just a vigil, it's also a memorial service and a show of solidarity with Israel for Netanel. That's how I've been told they pronounced his name here. They've seen him coming to this synagogue since he was just a tiny boy, and people who know him well saying that he was so loved, and they described him as an absolute terror, but very much loved by everybody. Of course, we know that we've decided, actually, we've been asked not to identify the synagogue that we're outside today due to security concerns, so we're not showing too much of the building. But of course, Netanel was 20 years old. He was a British citizen. He was serving in the Israeli Defence Forces. He'd been serving with them since he was 18 years old, and a member of the Golan Brigade. Now, that's one of the IDF's most highly decorated units defending Israel's borders. He was killed on Saturday. He was defending that border during that surprise attack by the terrorist organisation Hamas. Now, he grew up in London, and he was a pupil of the JFS school. That's a Jewish school about 10 miles away from where I am now. And he was described by his family as the life and soul of the party. He was loved by everybody. He loved music. He liked to DJ, and he had very strong Jewish pride. And he'd always been determined, we're told, to join the IDF. Now, during his funeral yesterday on Mount Herzl in Israel, you'll have seen that footage where the rocket sirens sounded, forcing people at that event to take cover. His sister Gabby was there, his brother Elliot as well. His commander too was at that funeral service, and his commander described him as a hero. Earlier on, GB News spoke to Rabbi Meyer Schindler, and he told us that the community here is feeling horrified and helpless.
Specific to our community tonight, it's an opportunity for people to really feel that they can commemorate this young boy, Nathaniel Young, who was only 20. You know, the family who they're very close with are in Israel, of course, at the moment, so they're not necessarily able to be there to support them, but at least they feel they're doing, again, something in his memory, and they'll have an opportunity to write some condolences as well to the family, which will be sent on to them. So hopefully that will be beneficial for the community too.
Well, as you know, Nigel, there is thought to be around 10 British citizens who have died in this conflict so far since that surprise attack by Hamas. There's also a number of people who are missing, including 26-year-old Jack Marlowe. Now, he actually went to the same school as Netanel. He's believed to be missing. He was providing security at the Supernova Music Festival when it was attacked by Hamas gunmen who just opened fire indiscriminately. There are concerns that he could have died. There's also concerns that he may have been taken hostage.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. And that's just one person and one family and group of friends and synagogue that'll be sad. There'll be a lot more sadness, I'm afraid, before this war is over. Now, it was supposed to be Sir Keir Starmer's big day, the leader's speech, the last one before he hopes and expects to become the British Prime Minister. And yet, how Labour Party's security can be as lax as this, I do not know. This was Keir Starmer shortly after he started on stage at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool.
True democracy is citizen-led. Politics needs an update. We demand a people's house. We demand a people's house. We are in crisis.
Now, this gentleman is with an organisation that's an offshoot of Just Stop Oil, and he's campaigning for proportional representation and for a sort of big people's panel chosen by lottery to help run the country. Now, I'm actually a supporter of proportional representation, but not of political disruption like that. Chris Hope, our political editor, joins me. Chris, for the Labour Party, this is... I mean, he was on stage there for 15 seconds. This is an appalling security lapse, isn't it?
It's appalling. And Nigel, I've been you when you were running a political party when someone threw, was it a milkshake on you? And what is so shocking is, of course, glitter isn't offensive, nor is milkshake. But what you don't know if you're under attack is what is it? What's on me? Is it damaging? Will it hurt me? And that's the shocking thing. And I thought Sir Keir Starmer did really well, really cool. He sort of shrugged them off and didn't respond. I'm not sure whether there's any training given to him for that behaviour. But, I mean, I know that the people around me on the edge of the hall there watching that speech were furious, running around, people with, you know, clearly security people wondering how on earth this could happen.
Yeah. Well, the difference is, Chris, when I had things thrown at me in the street, it was tough to avoid, but never. I tell you what, at a UKIP conference, nobody would have got on that stage anywhere near me. And the fact Labour hadn't thought that through surprised me. Now, to substance, which is important. From what I can see, it's housing and green energy that have dominated Keir's pitch to the nation.
That's right. So it's these new kind of eco-towns, garden cities, Edwardian buildings to make it seem more palatable to Middle England. It's an idea. It's a big boost, trying to build 1.5 million new homes over 5 years, about a third more than where the Tories are. I thought if you were here, Nigel, you may even be tempted to join the Labour Party because the policies we heard that in that hall weren't really that different to what the Tory party has to offer. How they're paying for it is different. The idea of VAT on private school bills, the issue of non-DOMs losing their tax status. But really, there's not much to divide the two parties. In fact, at one point he said, join us, this is Keir Starmer, to the adoring faithful. And then he said at one point, you want a government that is strong and stable, or you want one strong, and you and I remember that language from Theresa May back in 2017. I mean, and how badly that ended for the Tory government. So there's an issue of hubris here. I think if they assume this victory that the polls forecast them getting, it might not come out that way.
I mean, interestingly, as you say, the housing target, well, the Tories' target is 300,000 a year. So over 5 years, that would be 1.5 million. It's exactly the same. The green energy, well, you know, the Conservatives may have pushed a few deadlines back, but are still utterly committed to turning us into, apparently, the Saudi Arabia of wind. So what is it we're voting for? Is it the idea that we've had 13 years of a tired government and it's time for a change? Is that really what this election... I know it's a long way off, but right now, with the big conference speeches over, is that really what the pitch is?
That's it, and the small print isn't clear. They keep saying this non-dom charge will pay for all sorts of things. Mental health checks, 2 million more appointments, 5,000 more others, 10,000 more midwives, so it goes on. There's a long list of that non-dom charge is paying for, and we all know that non-doms will leave the country probably, and that might fall to zero very quickly. And that's a concern. What they are defining themselves is against a Tory party they see as who have lost the plot. Now, the danger of defining yourself on the terms of your enemy is no one knows why to vote for you. Where's the positivity? That's what they're missing. They're saying we are a clean slate, we have a vision, but you have to stand for something, Nigel. You can't just define yourselves by the opponent.
No, but I would say this, Chris. You know, I was at the Conservative Party conference last week with you, and they weren't just split down the middle. I mean, they're split into 4 or 5 different factions, from what I can see. Yeah. And clearly, many Tory MPs absolutely loathe each other. Now, of course, we have the left in the Labour Party, but they appear to be to me at least, a very subdued left. And do we not have to give Starmer credit for uniting the Labour Party?
Well, totally. I mean, this party has completely changed in just 2 years. In 2021, it was all about his discipline. Before that, of course, Jeremy Corbyn stopped being leader in 2019. What has gone from here are the cardigans and the sharp suits are back, Nigel. It's people here who are trying to show this is a party that means business. Lobbyists are here, big companies are here. They think that the big momentum is now with the Labour Party. And I think that's where it's going. But I don't think the party's earning that right yet to govern. Where's the big vision? How are you going to pay for it all? Is it all going to be borrowing? That's what it looks like, because otherwise they're not going to increase income tax. So we at GB News with you, Nigel, will be looking at the small print of the offer from Labour. It's by no means in the bag for them.
Final thought, Chris. Is Tony Blair behind the scenes, controlling all of the strings? Is this New Labour all over again?
Well, maybe not Blair, but if you're watching GB News earlier today when Peter Mandelson came on just behind me when I was with Andrew Pearce, we beckoned him over and we interviewed him off literally behind the wall behind me. We were saying to him, do you know what Keir Starmer's 5 targets are, or objectives? And he listed them all for us. I mean, he clearly wants to be in government. He's hanging around because he knows how to win a landslide. He told me on my podcast last year, there's not a day that goes by when he doesn't wish he was back in power. And that's why he's here. He's on the front row of the shadow cabinet for Rachel Reeves' speech. He's around the team. But then again, if you were Sir Keir Starmer, you'd want him in your camp. He knows how to win a landslide. But I'm just not sure Sir Keir Starmer is Tony Blair. Where are the slogans? Where's the retail offer for GB News viewers? We haven't seen it yet.
OK, in a moment, we're going to talk to somebody who was very involved with Jeremy Corbyn's election campaign to see how he feels. We'll also have a look at those housing targets and see whether they're actually going to make any difference to the country at all. Back with you in a couple of minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order. Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK. Here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's go back to Liverpool, and I'm going to be joined by Harry Burns, former Labour head of elections for the 2017 general election and vice president of Crestview Strategy. Harry, one thing I've noticed, and perhaps it's fortunate given the events that broke out over the weekend in Israel and Gaza, the 2018 Labour Party conference, there was a Palestinian flag on every chair and delegates busy waving them. Those days are over, aren't they?
They are, and thank God they are.
Well, you say thank God they are, but I mean, there you were, working very closely with Jeremy Corbyn, who, if I'm not mistaken, actually called Hamas friends of his.
So just to be clear, so I was head of elections for the 2017 general election campaign when Labour were very far behind the Tories at the start of the campaign. My job was very clear, save as many Labour MPs as possible. Then when it became clear that Corbyn was getting close to government, I, along with a lot of my other colleagues, resigned. I left the Labour Party, and then I tried to do everything I can to bring Corbyn down. Unfortunately for everyone, he is no longer a Labour MP. Well, he was.
No, Harry, thank you for that. And I was teasing you slightly, but the but I was
not like you, Nigel.
Oh, well, I know. But just before the break, I was actually paying credit to Keir Starmer because had the Corbynistas been prominent in the party, given the appalling terrorist attacks we saw at the weekend, I mean, that alone could have cost Labour the next general election. Has Starmer cleared out the hard left, or are they still there and just lying dormant?
No, I think Keir summed it up after the protester, invaded the stage, that Labour are no longer the party of protest. They are a serious potential party of government, and I think that they are showing the British people that the party has changed. It's unrecognisable from the party that I left back in 2017, and they've changed the party as they can change the country, because I think everyone can agree that we can't go on like this as a country. I mean, I'm sure even you, Nigel, must be thinking we can't stand 5 more years of this Tory government. It's absolutely time for a change, and Starmer is the man that's going to deliver this change for the people. Because you asked earlier what the retail offer is for your viewers, and the retail offer is simple. 13 years of failed government has led to our public services not working. We can't get a GP appointment. The trains don't run. I mean, I don't know, getting here was an absolute nightmare. Getting home, my train's just been cancelled this evening. Nothing is working. This country is completely broken, and there is only one possible way of changing the trajectory of where we're going. If you think we're going in the wrong direction, it's time to vote for a different party. Rishi Sunak is not going to take the country for fools by saying that he can be the change the country needs.
That's all well and good. That's all well and good. But so far, the policy offering isn't actually very different to that that's being put forward by the Conservatives. So is what you're saying...
No, I fundamentally disagree. I disagree.
Go on. How is it radically different?
How is it radically... So firstly, the Tories have had 13 years to implement an industrial strategy and get the economy growing. We've had yet another announcement today that our growth is projected to fall. We are a failing nation. It's managed decline under this government. Starmer will have a serious conversation with business. The Labour Party have fundamentally rebuilt their relationships with business, and they want to work together to implement a long-term industrial strategy that's going to take decisions that's going to pay off in the future, not short-termism, as we're seeing with HS2. Whatever you might think about HS2, the fact that we have spent so much money over so many years is an absolute travesty. And this is under the Tories' watch. So Labour will take long-term decisions that will pay off into the future, and our children will actually start to feel like they might be better off than their parents. Because currently, I've got 2 kids. I don't feel like they're going to have a better future under this government. But I think with Labour and with an industrial...
At the moment, Harry, he's odds on to be the next Prime Minister, and it's all well and good you making these big statements. What we'll do over the course of the next year is look at them in more detail. But thank you for joining me live from Liverpool. Well, I'm sorry about that cancelled train. Now, housing has been all the rage. It's a huge debate in this country in both of the parties. Charlie Lambden, housing market specialist, joins me. Charlie, Labour, both parties want to build 300,000 houses a year, and yet we're only going to build 160,000 this year. All sorts of planning problems, some of them to do with old European rules. But the big sell today from Keir Starmer was the concept of new towns built in sort of Edwardian-style terraces. How does that sound to you?
Well, I think when we were last together on Talking Pints, Nigel, you asked me what I would do, and I said if I was in government, I'd have a huge house-building campaign. So hopefully they were listening and paying attention when they watched us. So listen, I was really interested in this speech. I couldn't see any policy differences between the Tories and the Labours. I just couldn't see any. All I could hear was Keir saying, we can deliver. They can't, but we can. But it's the same. We're both trying to work on the same thing, but vote me in because I can deliver.
That was a little bit like my chat with Harry Burns a moment ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I couldn't see any clear difference. He's talking about long-term business investment. And that whole speech was preparing us for, I think, a cheap nuclear energy-based future. He talked about steel, he talked about port, he talked about nuclear scientists, he talked about energy, he talked about training people up in polytechnics, bringing polytechnics back, because anyone under 45 won't remember that polytechnics used to be a regular thing. And he talked about 10 years, a decade of hard grind, and then everything will be OK. And I found myself thinking, from a housing point of view, right now, there are a lot of people who think we're in a housing emergency, a housing crisis. There are people who can't pay their mortgage, people who can't pay their rent. Homelessness is spiking. And I didn't hear anything in that speech to help anyone who's wondering what they're going to do for the next 5 years.
Of course, the other point to make, that is very important, Charlie, is it's all well and good. Even if you build 300,000 new dwellings, if net migration is running at 600,000 a year, and the population's exploding, then actually you're not even keeping up.
No.
With demand for 1 year coming in, let alone...
So this is true, but I think the effects of it are highly localised. There are areas that are very, very badly hit by that, and there are areas that are untouched by that. Yeah. And so I think that all of this, housing is an individual person choosing where they want to live, and the location is absolutely essential, which is why planning... Now, the Tories so far have been unable to set fire to the planning roadblock that we've got. Can Labour do it? I don't know.
If you were in charge and said, right, we need at least 300,000 houses a year for the next... it's more than that. Where would you build them? How would you build them?
I would go to the cities who are most in need, the ones that have got the most chronic shortage, and I would suspend planning regulations, but I would ask developers to submit their proposal for them, and as long as it met the most essential requirements, they would get rubber stamped. So I would want to accelerate a very, very rapid rollout of affordable housing in the places where it's needed most for people to work, so especially for people who work on the front line of the services like NHS workers, fire, police, those kind of stuff. Because there's a short-term need, and all those people working in those services who don't have decent homes or can't afford the homes they live in is going to be affecting their work.
30s suburbia was a great dream, and London just grew and grew and grew, and it gave people, a nice place to live and 3 bedrooms and a bathroom and garden. But actually, we have very, very low-density housing in London in terms of height. Yeah. Don't we need to build London and the other cities up?
Yes, I think that definitely helps. It definitely helps the cities, and it also alleviates the space problem on the lateral space if you build up. But I think
and where do we plonk these new towns?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I have no idea how you go about choosing where they want to live, because you'd then have to sell that town, wouldn't you, to people? Come and live in this empty town.
I know. It's not easy. Charlie, come back and talk to us again. Housing is an issue that will not go away.
Thank you.
A piece of news for you. We covered the Stradley Park Hotel in Llanelli. Remember? A hotel very important to that town in Wales. Huge protest from the locals when they were told it was going to be filled up with cross-channel migrants. They blocked the road with concrete blocks, which they could do because it was a private road. And we learned tonight that the asylum seeker hotel plan for Stradley Park has been scrapped. And a lot of people who've campaigned in Llanelli will be very, very pleased indeed. I'm joined by Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, you had to almost feel sorry for the Labour leader today. His big speech, and yet he got demoted down the news agenda.
Well, inevitably because of what is going on. Though we will be touching on his speech in my programme, particularly I like the fact that in British politics our politicians are very open and very accessible and not surrounded by thousands of security guards, and therefore I particularly hate the fact that he was attacked. I think he handled it brilliantly, but that's a bad trend in British politics. You've obviously suffered from it more than most.
Yeah.
But we want to maintain a politics where we don't hide our politicians away, and these Extinction Rebellion people and all their associates really don't understand. They're too stupid to understand the risk that they are creating for the British body politic.
On policy, it was interesting. We were just chatting about housing with Charlie Lambden, and we had Chris Hope down the line. Almost no policy differences between the two main parties. Almost nothing.
Well, it's fascinating to see that the Labour Party is doing a Blair. It's trying to neutralise every policy issue by saying, "Oh, wonderful, the Labour Party's going to build Georgian houses." I know. I wrote a pamphlet calling for this a few years ago.
Even Rees Mogg didn't
getting as right-wing as me.
There we are. A Jacob housing policy. Let's see the weather.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Rain moving south into northern England, Northern Ireland and Wales overnight. Clearer but staying blustery for Scotland whilst it remains warm in the far south. There's a significant temperature contrast across the UK at the moment. Warmth in the southeast, chilly in the north and northwest, and in between a band of rain finally easing across central and western Scotland, pushing into southern Scotland during the evening, Northern Ireland, and then later on across parts of northern England and Wales. The rain pepping up by the end of the night in these areas as well. Now, it stays dry further south, but there'll be a lot of low cloud and mist to begin things on Wednesday. A mild start here, but a chilly start for Scotland, especially central belt northwards, mid-single figures, and a strong wind, in fact gales blowing through exposed northern and northwestern coasts with frequent showers here. So a fairly unpleasant day to come here, even if it has stopped raining. Further south, we've got spells of rain through Wales, the Midlands and East Anglia continuing through the day, staying largely dry after the early mist clears in the far south and southeast. Still warm, but not as warm as it has been. And then it's in the south where the rain comes to a stop on Thursday. The rain does ease, but it stays fairly drizzly along some of these southern counties of England. Brighter skies further north. In fact, a nice sunny day for North Wales, Northern England, much of Scotland and Northern Ireland. And then on Friday, further wet weather in the south before that clears to colder weather at the weekend.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order. Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Israeli Defense Forces have begun their counterattack on Hamas terrorists in Gaza as the Israeli death toll surpasses 1,000. And while Israel has faced the most devastating attack in its history, some people found it appropriate in Britain of all places to take to our streets with Palestinian flags accusing Israel of being the aggressor. But Israel didn't choose this war, the Islamist terrorists on its border did. So while closet anti-Semites attempt to out-Palestine each other outside the Israeli embassy in London, Israelis are spending their days in fear as family members have been dragged across the border into Gaza, with terrorists vowing to murder hostages every time Israel strikes back. We'll be hearing from someone with first-hand experience of this tragedy. Also tonight, we'll be discussing the economy as the error-prone International Monetary Fund is back again with its Romaniac, doom-ridden economic forecasts, claiming Britain will be the worst-performing economy of the G7 next year. But they were wrong in their forecasts about 2023, inducing them into a flip-flop. Who's to say they aren't wrong again for the umpteenth time? And finally, could the Labour Party be in the process of shedding itself of its association with Stalinist concrete block architecture? Well, the leader of the opposition has promised to bring more terraced Georgian townhouses to Britain's urban areas in a bid to solve the housing crisis. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by an incisive panel this evening. GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes. As always, I want to hear from you. You know it's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the important news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, within the last hour, the US President Joe Biden has condemned the attacks by Hamas on Israel, vowing that the Americas have Israel's back. Joe Biden was speaking a short time ago at the White House. Well, the Hamas terrorist group fired missiles, warning residents in the Israeli city of Ashkelon today to leave by 5 o'clock local time. Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile system was used to intercept many of the rockets. Israel Defense Forces claim more than 4,500 rockets were launched by Hamas since Saturday. The Israeli embassy to the US says more than 1,000 of its citizens have been killed in the violence.
This attack has brought to the surface painful memories and the scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide of the Jewish people. So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
Joe Biden speaking a short time ago. Well, the attacks today came in response to an unprecedented barrage of Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, forcing nearly 200,000 people to flee their homes. Israel is continuing to bomb the enclave. These pictures, if you're watching on television, are from a port on the Gaza coastline. Smoke billowing from flames as vehicles and buildings were set alight on the shoreline. We know too that apartment blocks, schools and a United Nations building were among those hit by hundreds of attacks. The UN has warned Israel its siege of Gaza is illegal under international law, but also said the abduction of hostages by Hamas is forbidden. Here at home, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says the UK will continue to support British-Israeli families.
We stand in solidarity with Israel and the people of Israel in the face of these barbaric acts of terrorism. And last night I went to visit a synagogue in London to express my support for the Jewish community in the UK. I was unequivocal with them that we will make sure that they feel safe at this time, and the police have been given very clear guidance and advice from the government to do everything that they can to keep the community safe. They will clamp down on any behaviour that falls foul of the law. I just remind everyone that Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation.
Well, in other news today, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has promised a decade of national renewal if his party is re-elected at the next general election. Addressing the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, he pledged to build a better Britain and announced plans to create new towns and build more homes. He also focused on the UK's economic growth plan as he laid out Labour's vision for Britain's future. Now, lastly, Holly Willoughby, the TV presenter, has announced she's quitting ITV's This Morning programme after 14 years hosting the show. In an Instagram post today, she said it had been an honour just to be part of its story, and she's made her decision for herself and her family. Last week, a shopping centre security guard was charged and remanded in custody over an alleged plot to kidnap and kill her. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Anti-Semitism is an ancient hatred which people now try to hide. Tragically, when events unfold in Israel, anti-Semitism rises in Britain. There is a clear and well-established correlation. This anti-Semitism presents itself under the cover of Palestinian solidarity nowadays. Now, there's nothing wrong with supporting Palestinians or indeed with criticising the Israeli government. Many on both sides have suffered greatly in this conflict. But, as the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, pointed out yesterday, there is something highly suspect about people who watch the horrific scenes of young people being murdered at a festival, or read about elderly, wheelchair-bound Holocaust survivors being dragged into Gaza to be held as hostages, whose instinct is to go straight to the Israeli embassy holding flares and smoke grenades, wearing balaclavas and protesting against Israel. Israel is a functioning democratic state, subject to the rule of law, with free elections. If you look at the events of the recent days and think Israel is the problem, then you ought to question your own instincts. You are probably part of the problem. Now, I'm not trying to be an advocate of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but recent events have indicated the words he once uttered. If Hamas put down their weapons today, there would be no more violence. If the Jews put down their weapons today, there would be no more Israel. Well, over the weekend, when the Israelis seemingly dropped their guard, we had an insight into what would happen if the Israelis did drop their weapons. If they did do what these supposed protesters on the streets of London want them to do, the State of Israel, a democratic, law-abiding state, would cease to exist. Supporting organisations that are prescribed as terrorist is a crime in the United Kingdom. Speaker at a rally in Brighton on Sunday said Hamas terror was inspiring and beautiful. Has this speaker been arrested? A student Palestine Society wrote on social media, the Palestinian people have the right to resist occupation by any means necessary. Have the police investigated? Indeed, Nigel pointed out on his programme, someone at one of the rallies was raising an index finger, a known ISIS solidarity gesture. These are just a few examples, but these people are actually committing a crime. But they use their purported care about the Palestinians to cover their fear and hatred of the people. They did care about the Palestinians. They would condemn Hamas, but they do not. Because Hamas is a bad, a wicked, an evil organisation, not just to Israel, but it throws its political opponents off rooftops, and it's supported by Iran, a country that has no civil rights at all. If Hamas would have its way, you would find Israel turned into something resembling Iran. That is its model, that is its paymaster, that it is its senior partner. So an ancient hatred is back in Britain, and it has taken refuge in a cause that purports to be a liberation movement. But whatever shape anti-Semitism takes, it remains the same brutal, evil ideology that it always has been. It cannot hide by pretending to be pro-Palestinian. As always, I want to hear from you. I want to know your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm now joined by the Israeli journalist, Emily Schrader. Thank you, Emily, for joining me. I'm very grateful. What is going on at the moment? What has been happening today? Can you bring us up to date?
So it has been a few days of chaos, as you can imagine, after the worst series of attacks that we have ever had. I think the most recent numbers had the death toll at about 1,200, as well as thousands more injured, and about 150 being held hostage by the terrorist organization Hamas. Today, we did see that activity continue. We saw heavy rocket fire on the south with multiple hits. There was even a direct hit, which ironically landed on a mosque near Jerusalem. They have now fired rockets at Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and all throughout southern Israel. And we've also faced some rocket fire from the north, although not quite as much as we're facing from Hamas in Gaza. Today alone, we had about 3 barrages in a row here in Tel Aviv, where I am. In fact, in one of them, I was actually in an interview and had to run to the bomb shelter. So hopefully that doesn't happen here with us tonight.
Well, no.
It's been obviously very, very difficult.
Indeed, I hope not. Is the fence now with Gaza secured so that terrorists can't continue to get through? And are all the terrorists on the ground, who were on the ground in Israel, have they been stopped?
So the last report that we received was that the communities where Hamas terrorists were still sort of hiding out, or in some cases actually exchanging fire with the IDF, that they have cleared out those communities. We can't say for sure that no one went elsewhere because we don't know exactly how many people crossed over in the first place. But the IDF has cleared out all of the communities in the south. That being said, there is still heavy rocket fire coming. In addition to that, and Israel is conducting airstrikes throughout Gaza at terror sites.
Yes, so Israel is now beginning the fight back. What is the plan for that, as you understand it? How will Israel approach rooting out the terrorists from Gaza?
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very clear that this operation, in his words, isn't going to be like other operations against Hamas. I think we can expect to see a much more forceful response that's aimed at deterring the ability of Hamas to function, hopefully in any way whatsoever. Personally, I'm of the opinion that the time has come for Israel to completely root out this organization. The danger that we're facing now is that it also has $60, $70, $80 million annually coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And this puts us in a much more difficult position because they are also doing the same thing with Islamic Jihad in Gaza and with Hezbollah on Israel's northern border. So Israel really does need to take action now to destroy this terrorist organization for good.
Well, thank you for joining me, Emily. We have to stop the funding getting through from Iran, and I hope that you manage to remain safe. But I very much appreciate your time this evening. With me now is my panel of GB News, senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, and the alleged criminal barrister, Jerry Hayes.
Oh, the rich is in the post.
Nigel, what ought Israel to do now? How should the response be calibrated to make sure this cannot happen again?
Well, I mean, they've got to try and destroy Hamas. I mean, it is as simple as that, and do it without hurting too many civilians. I mean, obviously, if they go in with ground forces into Gaza, which is obviously what is being intended, it is going to be very tricky for the civilian population. It's such a crowded place, 2 million people in 140 square miles. It would be really difficult. But Hamas have 30,000 fighters. Unless the Israelis can actually get rid of them, this problem will keep occurring. And the other big danger, obviously, is to try and keep Iran out of it.
And Jerry,